The sound of tearing silk cut through the murmur of the party like a gunshot. In the sudden silence, all eyes were on Eudora, standing on the stage next to her husband, Jasper, the billionaire titan. He looked down at the ruined bodice of her vintage dress, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. "Time for an upgrade," he whispered, for only her to hear. The crowd held its breath, expecting tears. A hasty retreat, a woman broken. They didn't know Eudora. They didn't see the ice forming in her eyes. She wasn't broken. She was being unleashed. What she did next wouldn't just end the party. It would detonate an empire. The morning of the party dawned with a sterile, oppressive perfection, much like Eudora's marriage. Sunlight filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of their Manhattan penthouse, glinted off surfaces so polished they seemed to hold no memory. For 5 years, Eudora had lived within these walls, a beautiful object placed just so in the grand museum of Jasper Croft's life. Jasper was a man carved from ambition and old money, the CEO of Croft Holdings, a global real estate empire he'd inherited and expanded with ruthless precision. He moved through the world as if he owned it, and in many ways he did. He had certainly come to own her. "You're wearing that?" he asked, his voice devoid of curiosity. He didn't look up from the tablet displaying a stream of stock market data. He was already dressed in a bespoke Tom Ford tuxedo, looking less like a man getting ready for a party, and more like a predator preparing for a hunt. Eudora looked down at the dress laid out on their king-sized bed. It was a deep emerald silk, a vintage piece from the 1950s that she had painstakingly restored herself. It had belonged to her grandmother, a woman of quiet strength and artistic spirit, everything Eudora felt she was losing. "I love this dress," she said, her voice softer than she intended. "It's old, Eudora. It looks sentimental. This party is about the future, not the past." He finally looked at her, his steel-grey eyes performing a swift, dismissive calculation. "Wear the diamond necklace I bought you in Geneva, and the blue gown, the one from Chanel." The blue gown was his choice, a beautiful but cold garment that made her feel like a mannequin. The diamonds were heavy, a glittering collar that always felt more like a leash. The party he'd told her was to celebrate the launch of the Olympus project, his most audacious venture, yet a multi-billion-dollar luxury development set to redefine the city's skyline. But Eudora knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone that it was more than that. The air in their home had been thick with secrets for months. His phone buzzed on the marble nightstand, the screen lighting up. He was careless, so assured of her submission that he didn't even bother to hide it. A name flashed for a fraction of a second before he swiped it away: Isabella. A cold knot tightened in Eudora's stomach. It wasn't the first time she'd seen the name. There had been late-night texts he claimed were international business, a lingering scent of a perfume that wasn't hers on his suit jackets, amouage, a scent far too bold for Eudora's preference for subtle florals. "Who's Isabella?" she asked, the words tasting like glass. Jasper's focus didn't waver from his screen. "Isabella Ricci. She's the CEO of Ricci Innovations, a key investor in the Olympus project. You'll meet her tonight. Be polite." The casualness of his lie was more painful than a slap. Eudora had seen the whispers in the society pages, the speculative articles about the power partnership between Croft and Ricci. They called Isabella a visionary, a firebrand, a woman who matched Jasper's ambition. They never mentioned Jasper's wife. In their world, Eudora was becoming invisible. She walked into the cavernous closet, her bare feet silent on the plush carpet. She ignored the blue Chanel gown and reached for her emerald dress. As she slipped the cool silk over her skin, it felt like armor. It was a small act of defiance, perhaps the only one she had left. As she fastened the delicate buttons at her back, she thought of her father. He had been a brilliant architect, a man of integrity, who had warned her about Jasper. "He doesn't see a partner, Ellie," he had said before he passed away. "He sees an acquisition." She hadn't listened, blinded by Jasper's charm and the dizzying world he offered. Later, as they stood by the door waiting for the elevator, Jasper's eyes finally landed on her dress. A flicker of irritation crossed his face. "I see you decided to ignore my advice." "It's just a dress, Jasper." "Nothing is just a dress, Eudora." He corrected his tone sharp. "Everything is a message. That dress says you're clinging to the past. Tonight I need you to represent my future." He reached out and adjusted her strap, his touch cold and proprietary. "Just smile, look beautiful, and don't say anything important. Can you manage that?" As the elevator doors opened, she met his gaze in the mirrored surface. Her reflection looked pale, a ghost in a green dress. But behind the fear in her eyes, a tiny ember of anger began to glow. She had been a ghost in her own life for too long. Tonight, something had to change. She just didn't yet know that Jasper himself would provide the match to set her world on fire. The party was being held at the observatory, a triple-height event space on the 90th floor of a skyscraper Jasper's company owned. The views were breathtaking, the city lights, a sprawling galaxy of diamonds below. Waiters in crisp uniforms moved through the throng of guests with trays of champagne and impossibly intricate canapes. The air hummed with power, the collective murmur of the city's elite bankers, politicians, tech moguls, and socialites. Eudora played her part as she always did. A serene smile fixed on her face, a champagne flute held delicately in her hand. She was the perfect hostess, the gracious wife nodding and murmuring pleasantries while feeling utterly disconnected, as if she were watching a film of her own life. Jasper left her side almost immediately, drawn into the magnetic center of the room. And there, waiting for him, was Isabella Ricci. Seeing her in person was like being struck by lightning. Isabella was everything the articles promised, tall, raven-haired, with eyes that missed nothing, and a smile that was both dazzling and predatory. She wore a crimson gown that clung to her like a second skin, a stark, confident slash of color in the sea of muted tones. She and Jasper looked like a matched set, two perfectly honed weapons of industry. Eudora watched them from across the room. She saw the way Jasper's hand rested on the small of Isabella's back, a gesture of casual intimacy that was more damning than a kiss. She saw the way they leaned in to speak, their heads close together, sharing secrets in a room full of people. They were a team, and Eudora was the inconvenient secret that hadn't yet been disposed of. Feeling a wave of nausea, she excused herself and made her way toward the powder room, needing a moment to breathe. As she passed a secluded alcove, she heard familiar voices. It was two of the board members' wives' women, who had always treated her with a cloying, condescending sweetness. "Can't believe he brought her here tonight," one of them, Beatrice, whispered. "It's one thing to have a bit on the side, but to parade her in front of everyone. And his wife, it's just cruel." "Jasper doesn't care about cruelty. He cares about power," the other Margaret replied. "Isabella Ricci isn't just a fling. Her company's tech is the entire backbone of the Olympus project. He needs her, and from the looks of it, he wants her too. I heard he's already had the lawyers draft the divorce papers. The announcement is imminent. Poor Eudora. She's a sweet girl, but she was never in his league. She's artistic. Jasper needs a killer. The word struck Eudora with physical force. Divorce papers. The world tilted, the ambient noise of the party fading to a dull roar in her ears. She leaned against the cold wall, steadying herself. It wasn't just a suspicion anymore. It was a pre-written ending to her story, an ending in which she was simply edited out. She returned to the party, but something inside her had irrevocably shifted. The shock was crystallizing into a cold, hard clarity. She looked at the powerful people in the room, the ones who smiled at her with pity, and she realized they were not her judges. They were just an audience. Her eyes found her best friend Chloe, a sharp-witted journalist who had navigated her way into the event. Chloe met her gaze from across the room, and her smile faltered, replaced by a look of concern. She knew Eudora too well. With a subtle nod, Chloe began to move toward her. "I need to get into Jasper's office," Eudora whispered urgently when Chloe reached her side. "His private office. Here in this building." Chloe's eyes widened. "Ellie, what's going on? They're not just having an affair. He's leaving me. The women in the bathroom said the divorce papers are already drawn up. I need to know. I need to see it for myself." Chloe, ever the pragmatist, didn't waste time with platitudes. "His office is on the 92nd floor. The executive elevator needs a key card, but the service elevator might be our best bet. I'll create a distraction." 5 minutes later, a loud crash echoed from the bar area as Chloe, with theatrical clumsiness, tripped into a waiter, sending a pyramid of champagne flutes cascading to the floor. As all eyes turned to the commotion, Eudora slipped away, her heart hammering against her ribs. She found the service corridor, a stark, utilitarian space that was a world away from the opulence of the party. The service elevator whirred to life, carrying her 2 floors up. The 92nd floor was dark and silent, a ghost town of executive power. Jasper's office was at the end of the hall, a corner suite with glass walls overlooking the city. The door was locked. Panic seized her for a moment, but then she remembered the emergency code he used for everything his father's birthday. She punched in the numbers. The lock clicked open. The office was a monument to Jasper's ego, a massive mahogany desk, abstract art that cost more than a house and a faint scent of his expensive cologne. She went straight to the desk. She didn't know what she was looking for, but she would know it when she saw it. In the bottom drawer beneath a stack of blueprints was a locked leather portfolio. Her hands trembled as she tried the same code. It opened. Inside, nestled between financial projections for the Olympus project, was a thick folder from Jasper's personal attorney. The first document was a draft of a divorce settlement. It was brutal. It cited a non-disclosure agreement she'd signed years ago, offering her a pittance to walk away quietly and disappear. The second document was a prenuptial agreement. But it wasn't for her. It was for Jasper Croft and Isabella Ricci. But then she saw it. Tucked behind the legal documents was another set of papers, something that didn't belong. It was a separate ledger detailing a series of wire transfers. Money was being moved from Croft Holdings' main pension fund into a shell corporation registered in the Cayman Islands. The same shell corporation that was providing the initial undisclosed funding for the Olympus project. He wasn't just replacing his wife. He was stealing from his own employees to fund his new empire with his new queen. The sheer breathtaking arrogance of it stole her breath away. This wasn't just infidelity. This was a federal crime. Her phone buzzed. It was Chloe. "They're starting the speeches. He's looking for you." Eudora took out her phone. With shaking hands, she photographed every single page of the ledger, every damning transfer, every illegal transaction. She sent the files to a secure encrypted email account she'd created years ago and never used. As she placed the portfolio back in the drawer, she saw her reflection in the dark glass of the window. The frightened, heartbroken woman was gone. In her place was someone she barely recognized. Her eyes were dark with a purpose she had never known. Jasper had made a fatal mistake. He thought he was married to a piece of art, fragile, beautiful, and silent. He was about to find out he was married to a woman who now had the power to burn his world to the ground. Returning to the party was one of the hardest things Eudora had ever done. The elevator ride down felt like a descent from the cold, clear heights of truth back into the perfumed deception of the gala. Every smile directed at her felt like a lie, every polite inquiry a veiled insult. But the evidence on her phone was a physical weight in her purse, a secret power that steadied her nerves. Jasper found her near the grand staircase, his face a mask of irritation. "Where have you been?" "The speeches are starting. I'm about to announce the final funding partner." He glanced at Isabella, who stood a few feet away, radiating triumphant confidence. "This is the most important night of my career, Eudora. Try to look happy for me." The condescension in his voice, which once would have made her shrink, now fanned the flames of her rage. She gave him a slow, serene smile. "Of course, Jasper. I wouldn't miss it for the world." Her calmness seemed to unnerve him more than tears would have. He watched her for a moment, a flicker of confusion in his eyes, before turning and striding toward the small stage that had been set up at the front of the room. Eudora knew she couldn't do this alone. Exposing Jasper required more than just evidence. It required a strategy. There was only one person she could trust, a man who despised Jasper's brand of corporate corruption as much as her own father had Arthur Vance. Arthur was a legend figure in the city's financial landscape, a former titan of industry who had served on the Croft Holdings board for decades out of loyalty to Jasper's father. He had retired a few years ago after a bitter falling out with Jasper over his aggressive, ethically questionable business practices. Arthur had always been kind to Eudora, seeing in her a reflection of the integrity her father had possessed. She found him by the windows observing the party with a look of weary disdain. He was an older man, with a shock of white hair and eyes that had seen everything. "Arthur," she said, her voice low, "I need your help." He turned, and his expression softened when he saw her. "Eudora, my dear, I was sorry to hear about your father. This must be difficult for you." "It's more difficult than you know," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Jasper is not the man you think he is. He's not even the man his father was." Arthur gave a short, humorless laugh. "I am well aware of that. Jasper has the ambition of his father, but none of the honor. What has he done?" There, in the relative quiet of the corner, Eudora told him everything. She spoke of the affair, the divorce papers, and then the financial fraud. She showed him the photographs on her phone. As he scrolled through the images of the ledger, his face grew darker and darker, his jaw tightening with a cold fury. "The pension fund," he whispered, his voice thick with disgust. "He's gutting the employees' retirement to fund this vanity project. He's leveraging the futures of thousands of families for his own glory. This is monstrous. I know, Eudora said, but I don't know what to do. If I go to the press, his lawyers will bury me. If I confront him, he'll destroy me. Arthur looked from the phone back to her face, and for the first time that night, Eudora saw not pity, but profound respect in someone's eyes. You have your father's courage, Eudora, and his intelligence. You haven't come to me for tears. You've come to me for a weapon. He paused, his gaze sweeping the room, before landing on Jasper, who was now laughing with a group of investors. Jasper's greatest weakness, Arthur said, is his arrogance. He believes he is untouchable. He needs to be brought down, not in a quiet boardroom, but in front of the very people whose admiration he craves. He needs to be publicly humiliated. A plan began to form between them, spoken in urgent, hushed tones. Arthur knew the inner workings of the company, the key players, the regulatory bodies. He knew exactly which investors in the room had the most to lose and who would turn on Jasper the fastest. He's going to make a grand speech, Arthur strategized. He will praise his own genius, and then I suspect he will announce Isabella Ricci not just as a partner, but as the cornerstone of his new vision. That's his moment of triumph, and that is when you will strike. How? Eudora asked, her heart racing. He will try to silence you, but I will make a call. The evidence you have is enough for the SEC to act. By the time you're done speaking, it will be too late for him to spin the narrative. The truth will be out. He gave her a firm, reassuring look. But you must be the one to deliver the blow. It has to be you. The idea was terrifying. To stand up in front of this powerful crowd, to confront the man who had controlled her life for so long, it seemed impossible. But then she thought of the quiet dignity of her father, the stolen futures of the Croft employees, and the cold, smug certainty on Isabella's face. The fear didn't vanish, but it was eclipsed by a powerful, righteous anger. He's going to call me to the stage, Eudora said, a sudden, chilling premonition washing over her. He'll do it, to make a point, to show me off one last time, before he discards me. Then let him, Arthur said, his voice grim. Let him set his own stage for his own execution. He squeezed her hand. Go on now. Let him think you are the dutiful, silent wife. Let him underestimate you one last time. It will be the last mistake he ever makes. Eudora nodded, taking a deep breath. She felt as though she were preparing for battle. As she turned back toward the center of the room, she smoothed down her emerald dress. The dress he hated, the dress that represented her past. But she would wear it as she secured her future. It was no longer just a dress. It was her banner. The lights in the observatory dimmed, and a single spotlight focused on the stage. A hush fell over the crowd as Jasper Croft, radiating charisma, stepped up to the microphone. He looked every inch the conquering hero, the master of the universe. Friends, colleagues, visionaries. His voice boomed, smooth and confident. Thank you for joining me on this monumental evening. We are not just here tonight to celebrate a building of steel and glass. We are here to celebrate a new future for this city. A future we are building together. The Olympus Project is more than a name. It is a promise of innovation, luxury, and unparalleled vision. Eudora stood near the edge of the crowd, Chloe at her side, for moral support. Arthur, a discreet but solid presence a few feet away. She watched Jasper, this man she had once loved, and felt nothing but a profound, icy distance. He was a stranger performing a well-rehearsed role. He spoke for 10 minutes, weaving a grand narrative of ambition and success. He thanked his board, his investors, the city officials who had greased the wheels for his project. It was a masterclass in public relations, full of soaring rhetoric and carefully crafted humility. Eudora could feel the energy in the room building, the guests captivated by his performance. They believed him. They were investing in him, in his vision. "But a vision," Jasper continued, his voice dropping to a more intimate tone, "is nothing without the right partners. It requires shedding the old, the sentimental, the things that hold us back, and embracing a future that is bold, dynamic, and fearless." His eyes swept the room and landed directly on Eudora. Her heart gave a painful thud. This was it. The public dismissal couched in the language of progress. "And of course," he said with a practiced smile, "a man's vision is supported by those closest to him. I'd like to ask my wife Eudora to join me on stage." A polite, scattered applause rippled through the room. Chloe squeezed her arm. "You can do this," she whispered fiercely. Walking towards the stage felt like moving through water. Every eye was on her, and she could feel their pity, their curiosity. She held her head high, her steps measured and deliberate. As she reached the stage, Jasper took her hand. His grip was like iron, his smile a rictus of false affection. "My beautiful wife Eudora," he said to the crowd, keeping her hand in his. "A talented artist, a lover of history, a reminder of where we've been." The subtext was clear to everyone who knew the rumors. He was framing her as the past, a relic to be honored before being put away. He then turned his attention to the other side of the stage. "And now I want to introduce the future. The driving force behind the technology that will make Olympus a living, breathing entity. A true visionary, a leader and a partner in every sense of the word. Please welcome the brilliant CEO of Ricci Innovations, Isabella Ricci." The applause was thunderous as Isabella ascended the stage, a vision in crimson. She moved with the fluid grace of a panther, her eyes shining with triumph. She shook Jasper's hand, but her gaze flickered to Eudora, a small, victorious smirk playing on her lips. She was so sure she had won. The three of them stood on the stage, the husband, the wife, and the mistress, a perfect volatile tableau of betrayal. The air crackled with unspoken tension. Jasper raised his champagne glass, "And so I want to propose a toast, not just to the Olympus project, but to new beginnings, to the future, to the partnerships that will define it." He clinked his glass with Isabella's. As an afterthought, he turned to Eudora, who stood frozen beside him. He gestured for her to raise her glass. She didn't move. A flicker of annoyance crossed his face. He leaned in his voice, a venomous whisper meant only for her. "Play your part, Eudora. One last time." She finally met his eyes, and what he saw there seemed to startle him. There was no fear, no pain, only a calm, chilling stillness. He continued to smile for the crowd, but his grip on her arm tightened. He was losing control of the narrative, and he knew it. He needed to re-establish his dominance, to put her back in her place, one final time. With a theatrical, charming laugh, he said to the audience, "My wife is so overcome with emotion. She's speechless." He turned to her, his smile never wavering. "Let's give her a hand, shall we?" He began to applaud, and as he brought his hands together, he deliberately hooked his expensive shoe on the delicate, decades-old hem of her emerald dress. The movement was subtle, almost imperceptible at first. A slight snag. But Jasper didn't stop. As he took a small, calculated step back, still applauding his own cruel joke, He put his full weight on the fabric. Eudora felt the pull, a sharp, violent tug at her waist. And then came the sound. It was not loud, but in the expectant silence of the room, it was utterly obscene. A dry, rasping rip, the sound of silk lovingly preserved for over 70 years giving way. It tore from the hem all the way up to her hip, the vintage fabric surrendering with a finality that echoed the destruction of her marriage. A collective gasp swept through the observatory. The polite smiles froze on the faces of the guests. The applause died instantly. Everyone stared mesmerized by the quiet horror of the moment. The emerald dress, her armor, her banner hung in tatters around her, a jagged line of ruin exposing her leg from ankle to thigh. Isabella Ricci's triumphant smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of shock, and beneath it, a sliver of smug satisfaction. This was the ultimate humiliation, a public branding of Eudora, as used, discarded, and broken. Jasper looked down at the torn dress, then back up at Eudora's face. The charming mask fell away for a second, revealing the naked contempt beneath. He leaned in close, his breath warm against her ear, his whisper a drop of pure poison. "See, I told you that old thing was fragile. Time for something new." He expected her to crumble. He expected tears, a choked sob, a hurried, shameful exit from the stage, leaving him and Isabella as the victors. It was the scene he had written in his mind, the perfect, brutal end to their chapter. But Eudora did not cry. She did not run. She stood perfectly still for a long moment, the torn silk fluttering around her in the conditioned air. She looked down at the ruined dress, the last tangible piece of her grandmother of her past. A profound and terrible calm settled over her. Jasper hadn't just torn a piece of fabric. He had torn away the last vestiges of the timid, compliant woman she used to be. He had ripped open the cage, and now she was free. A slow, deliberate smile touched her lips. It was a terrifying smile, holding no warmth, no humor. It was the smile of a person who had absolutely nothing left to lose and everything to gain. The crowd watched, utterly bewildered by her reaction. Jasper's smirk faltered. This was not in his script. He had expected a victim. He was facing a survivor. Her eyes clear and cold as ice lifted from the wreckage of her dress and met his. She saw him for what he was, not a titan, not a king, but a petty, insecure man whose power was built on the humiliation of others. Without breaking eye contact with him, she reached over and took the microphone from its stand. Her hand was perfectly steady. The weight of it felt solid, real. It was a conduit for the voice he had tried so hard to silence. The room was so quiet that the faint hum of the building's ventilation system was audible. Jasper took a step toward her, his face darkening with rage. "Eudora, what do you think you're doing?" he hissed. She ignored him. She turned to face the hundreds of stunned guests, her gaze sweeping across their faces. She saw their shock, their pity, their morbid curiosity. She held the microphone to her lips. Her voice, when it came, was not a whisper or a scream. It was clear, steady and resonant, carrying to every corner of the silent room. "My husband is right," she began the words, cutting through the tension. "It is time for something new, and it's important to be honest about what we're celebrating tonight." She paused, letting the words hang in the air. Jasper's face had gone pale. Isabella watched her with narrowed, suddenly anxious eyes. "This isn't just a launch party for the Olympus project," Eudora continued, her voice gaining strength. "It's also an engagement party." A wave of confused murmurs rippled through the audience. She let them wonder for a moment, building the suspense. Then she turned her head slightly, her gaze falling first on her husband, then moving deliberately coldly to the woman in the crimson dress standing beside him. "An engagement party for my husband, Jasper Croft," she said, her voice dropping for the final devastating blow. "And his mistress, Isabella Ricci." The two names, Jasper Croft and Isabella Ricci, hung in the air, woven together not in a toast, but in an indictment. For a split second, the universe of the party held its breath, suspended in disbelief. Then the silence shattered. It wasn't a gradual murmur. It was an instantaneous explosion of sound. 100 private conversations erupted at once, a cacophony of gasps, shocked whispers, and nervous laughter, as guests turned to one another, their eyes wide. The atmosphere, once thick with champagne-fueled adulation, was now electric with scandal. Isabella's carefully constructed composure disintegrated. The blood drained from her face, leaving her crimson dress to mock her deathly pallor. Her hand, which had been resting confidently on her hip, flew to her throat in a gesture of pure instinctual panic. This was not how her victory was supposed to look. She was supposed to be anointed, not accused. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape, but she was trapped on stage, pinned by the gazes of 1,000 eyes. Jasper, reacting with the feral speed of a cornered predator, lunged for the microphone. His face, moments before a portrait of smug success, was now a twisted mask of incandescent rage. "That's enough, Eudora," he snarled, his voice a low growl that was still audible to those nearby. "Security, get her off the stage. She's hysterical." Eudora sidestepped his clumsy grab with a dancer's grace, her body moving with a fluid purpose that belied the tatters of her dress. She held the microphone firmly, her knuckles white, and met his fury with an unnerving calm. She leaned into the mic, her voice cutting cleanly through the rising chaos. "Hysterical," she repeated the single word, dripping with irony. The crowd quieted again, eager for the next act of this unforeseen drama. "It's a convenient word, isn't it? The one men like you have always used to silence women who speak a truth you don't want to hear." She turned her gaze from her husband to the sea of fascinated, horrified faces. "I assure you all I am not hysterical. I have never been more clear-headed in my entire life. I am simply finished with the lies." She let that statement settle a promise of more revelations to come. Jasper stood frozen, his powerlessness in this moment, a stark and foreign feeling. He was used to commanding rooms, not being a prisoner within them. "You all stand here tonight," Eudora continued, her voice resonating with a newfound steely authority, "ready to invest your millions in this man's vision. You celebrate his audacity. But do you know what this grand vision is truly built upon? It's not built on genius. It's built on theft." The word theft landed with the force of a physical blow. The investors in the crowd, men and women who managed billions of dollars, stiffened. This was no longer just a juicy marital dispute. It was an attack on the very foundation of their world money. The Olympus project isn't just being funded by legitimate capital. She declared, her eyes scanning the front rows, picking out the faces of the key financial backers. Its seed money, its very foundation, was stolen. It was taken from the people you never see, from the secretaries who manage your calendars, from the janitors who clean your offices after you've gone home, from the construction crews who have risked their lives building this city for 40 years. It was stolen from the Croft Holdings Employee Pension Fund. An audible wave of shock rolled through the room. This was an accusation of such magnitude, so utterly ruinous that it seemed impossible. Yet the conviction in Eudora's voice was absolute. He created a shell corporation. She went on, her delivery precise and damning. A phantom company called Aegis Development Group, conveniently registered in the Cayman Islands, where secrets are easy to keep. Over the last 18 months, my husband has illegally siphoned more than $90 million from the retirement accounts of his own loyal workers. He is gambling their futures, their hopes for a dignified old age, to build this glass monument to his own ego. Jasper finally found his voice, shouting over her lies. These are the desperate, pathetic lies of a scorned woman. But his denials were drowned out by the rising tide of panic. An investor in the front row, a notoriously ruthless hedge fund manager named Marcus Thorne, bellowed, "Answer the question, Croft. Is this true? Did you use the pension funds?" Before Jasper could formulate a response, a calm, authoritative voice spoke from the edge of the crowd. Arthur Vance, his white hair gleaming in the spotlight's glare, stepped forward. Every head turned towards him. His reputation for integrity was legendary, his word as good as gold. "She is telling the truth," Arthur stated, his voice steady and grave. The room fell into a dead silence. As a former board member with oversight privileges, I was alerted to certain discrepancies. What Eudora has uncovered is horrifyingly accurate. The evidence is irrefutable, and I have already taken the liberty of forwarding a complete file to the Securities and Exchange Commission and the District Attorney's Office. It was a death sentence. The mention of the SEC was the final nail in the coffin. Chaos erupted anew, but this time it was laced with fear. Investors were scrambling, pulling out their phones, furiously texting their lawyers and brokers. Shouts of "fraud" and "I'm ruined" echoed through the opulent hall. The party was over. The feeding frenzy had begun. Amid the pandemonium, Eudora had one last piece of business. Her gaze moved from Jasper's ashen face to Isabella, who was trying to inch away from the stage to melt back into the crowd like a phantom. "And you, Isabella!" Eudora's voice rang out, a final piercing note that froze the other woman in place. Isabella turned slowly, her face a mask of pure terror. "Don't think you're just the other woman in this story. Your innovative company's initial investment was the first installment of that stolen money laundered through your accounts. You knew exactly where the money was coming from. You're not just a mistress, you're a co-conspirator." Isabella visibly flinched, as if she had been physically struck. Her career, her reputation, her entire life's work, all of it incinerated in that single public accusation. Eudora looked at the carnage she had wrought, at Jasper surrounded by a mob of his furious, betrayed investors, at Isabella standing utterly alone, a pariah in a blood-red dress. She felt a profound, quiet sense of justice. Her work was done. She let the microphone fall from her hand. It hit the stage with a heavy, resonant thud that seemed to punctuate the end of an era. With the tatters of her emerald dress trailing behind her, like the flag of a victorious, weary warrior, she walked to the edge of the stage and descended the steps. The crowd, a chaotic swirl of panic and fury, just moments before, parted for her. They stared at her with a new expression, a mixture of shock, awe, and perhaps even fear. She was no longer the pitiable wife. She was an avenging force of nature. She met no one's eye, her head held high, her back straight. She walked through the grand ballroom, past the half-empty glasses of champagne and the fallen canapes, a silent, graceful figure moving through the ruins she had created. As the enormous glass doors of the observatory hissed open before her, she stepped out into the quiet of the lobby, the sounds of chaos fading behind her. And through the vast floor-to-ceiling windows, she saw them a silent, synchronized ballet of flashing red and blue lights ascending the avenue far below. The law was coming for Jasper Croft. The reckoning was complete. The implosion of Jasper Croft's world was not a quiet affair. It was a public spectacle of breathtaking proportions. The story became the city's obsession, a modern-day morality play, served up in daily installments by a ravenous media. Eudora, in the taxi she had hailed in a daze, saw the first news vans screaming towards the skyscraper as she was speeding away from it. She didn't look back. Her reflection in the window showed a woman in a ruined dress. Her face pale, but her eyes burning with a terrible newfound clarity. By the time her flight to Florence was ascending over the Atlantic, the name Eudora Croft was on the lips of millions transformed overnight, from a footnote in society pages to the heroine or villain depending on the headline of a corporate drama. She landed in Italy, a ghost deliberately untethering herself from the life that had nearly suffocated her. She didn't watch the news or read the papers, but the fallout was impossible to escape entirely. Headlines screamed from newsstands. She passed on her way to the market. Croft CEO arrested for pension fraud. The all caps a testament to the scale of his hubris. Another showed a grainy photo of Isabella Ricci being escorted from her office by federal agents, her face a mask of disbelief. The Mistress and the millions. Ricci Innovations implicated. The Olympus project, once hailed as Jasper's magnum opus, became a tombstone, a half-started construction site entangled in litigation and ruin. For Eudora, Florence was a sanctuary. She rented a small, airy apartment in the Oltrarno district, a place with terracotta floors and a balcony that overlooked a jumble of ancient rooftops. Here, the only empire that mattered was the one built by the Medici, the only scandal centuries old, immortalized in marble and oil paint. The first few weeks were a blur of sleep and silence. The adrenaline that had carried her through that night finally receded, leaving behind a profound exhaustion. She was unlearning the constant low-level fear she had lived with for years, teaching her muscles to unclench her breathing, to deepen. Slowly, she began to emerge. Her days found a new rhythm, dictated not by a social calendar, but by her own soul's quiet longing. She would wake with the morning sun, buy fresh bread and peaches from a local market, and then lose herself in the city. She spent hours in the Uffizi Gallery, sitting before Botticelli's Primavera, not as an art historian analyzing technique, but as a woman relearning the language of beauty and grace. She rediscovered the simple, profound joy of her passion. In the quiet halls of the Laurentian Library, surrounded by Michelangelo's architecture and the scent of ancient paper, she felt a connection to something larger and more enduring than Jasper's fleeting fragile power. She was not Jasper Croft's wife. She was Eudora, a scholar, a lover of art, a person whole and separate. The trial was a distant storm she monitored from the calm of her Florentine haven. Sitting in a small cafe, the aroma of espresso mingling with the sweet Tuscan air, she would read the updates on a small laptop. She read about Jasper's arrogance in the courtroom, his attempts to paint her as an unstable, vengeful liar. But the evidence was irrefutable, a cold, hard chain of numbers and transactions that told a story of greed and betrayal no lawyer could spin. When the verdict came in, guilty on all counts, a sentence of 20 years in federal prison, Eudora felt no surge of triumph, no satisfying thirst for vengeance quenched. There was only a quiet, somber finality. It was the closing of a heavy book, its last page written. She closed her laptop, paid for her coffee, and walked to the Arno River. Feeling the sun on her face, a free woman. Months later, a thick envelope forwarded by her discreet lawyer in New York arrived at her post office box. She recognized Jasper's aggressive, slanting handwriting immediately. Her first instinct was to throw it unread into the river. But she knew she had to face this last ghost. Sitting on a stone bench in the Bobol de Boli Gardens, surrounded by the scent of roses and cypress, she slit it open. The letter was 12 pages of undiluted narcissism. It was a masterpiece of manipulation, a testament to a man utterly incapable of introspection. He never once apologized. Instead, he blamed her, the bored Arthur Vance, the jealous media. He wrote of his own suffering in prison, the indignity of it all. He recounted their early days together, twisting shared memories into a narrative of her inadequacy and his generosity. The final pages were the most delusional, a desperate, pathetic plea for her to use her newfound fame to advocate for him, to help him appeal, to tell the world it was all a terrible mistake. "We were a team, Ellie," he wrote. "You owe me this." Eudora read the last line, and a small, humorless laugh escaped her lips. He still didn't get it. He never would. He saw her not as a human being he had wounded, but as a possession that had rebelled. She carefully folded the letter, walked to the Ponte Vecchio as the sun began to set, and lit a corner of the pages with a match. She held it until the flames nearly licked her fingertips, then dropped the burning curling paper into the river below. She watched as the last glowing embers hissed and vanished into the dark, flowing water, taking the final remnants of her past life with them. 2 years after that night, London was a city alive with a crisp autumn energy. In a chic, minimalist gallery in the Mayfair district, Eudora was the center of a captivated audience. The Gallery Provenance was hers. She had built it from the ground up, pouring her inheritance and her soul into creating a space renowned for its integrity and expertise in authenticating and restoring historical art. She moved with an easy, understated confidence, dressed in a simple, elegant black dress, her only jewelry, a pair of pearl earrings her father had given her. She was speaking to a small group of clients about a 17th century painting her firm had just rescued from obscurity. Her voice was passionate, her knowledge encyclopedic, her love for her work radiating from her. A man at the edge of the group watched her, his expression one of quiet admiration. He was an architect in town for a conference who had wandered in, drawn by the painting in the window. When her talk concluded, he approached her, his smile gentle and unassuming. "What you do is amazing," he said, his eyes meeting hers directly. "You don't just restore paintings. You bring stories back to life." Eudora met his gaze and offered a genuine, unguarded smile, a smile that reached her eyes. "I believe every piece of art has a soul," she replied, her voice soft but sure. "Sometimes it just gets buried under layers of dirt and neglect. It just needs to be carefully uncovered." As she spoke the words, she felt their profound personal truth. She, too, had been buried, obscured under the weight of a gilded cage. But she had done the painstaking work. She had chipped away at the lies, cleaned away the fear, and restored the vibrant, strong, and brilliant woman who had been there all along. The architect saw a woman who ran a beautiful gallery. But Eudora knew the truth. Her life itself was her greatest restoration project. And it was finally a masterpiece. Eudora's story is a powerful reminder that the most devastating betrayals can sometimes forge the most unbreakable strength. She walked into that party as a forgotten wife and walked out as the architect of her own liberation. Her journey shows us that true power isn't found in wealth or status, but in the courage to speak the truth, even when your voice shakes. She proved that dignity is the one jewel that can never be bought or torn away. If you were moved by Eudora's incredible story of justice and rebirth, please show your support by hitting that like button. For more stories of karma resilience and the indomitable human spirit, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell so you never miss an update. What did you think of Jasper's public downfall? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We love hearing from you. Thank you for listening. The soft hiss of a zipper cutting through the midnight silence of a $30 million Tribeca penthouse was the only sound Gideon Roth made. He moved like a ghost in his own home, past the Murano glass sculptures and the Jean-Michel Basquiat painting that hung in the foyer. In the master bedroom, illuminated only by the cold blue glow of the city, outside his wife Naomi slept, her body curled around the precious new life growing within her. Their son was the picture of peaceful trust, a trust Gideon was about to detonate. He wouldn't even leave a note. Notes were for sentimental fools. He was leaving a life behind, and by morning, the only evidence of his departure would be the empty space beside his sleeping, pregnant wife. The air in the penthouse was chilled to a precise 68 degrees Fahrenheit, a temperature Gideon insisted upon for optimal sleep. Tonight, however, the cold felt different. It was the sterile, unforgiving cold of a decision made. Gideon Roth, CEO of Nexus Capital, and a man whose face had graced the cover of Forbes under the headline, "The Digital Midas," was performing the final, quietest act of a meticulously planned betrayal. His bag, a sleek leather weekender from Bottega Veneta, was already packed. It sat by the door of his cavernous walk-in closet, filled not with the bespoke Brioni suits he wore to command boardrooms, but with the casual, expensive linens of a man disappearing to paradise. A Patek Philippe watch with a dual time zone function, a gift from Naomi for their 3rd anniversary, was already strapped to his wrist. One time zone was set to New York. The other was already set for the Leeward Islands. He paused at the bedroom door, his hand hovering over the cool brass handle. A flicker of something guilt, perhaps, or a vestige of the man he used to be made him look back. Naomi shifted in her sleep, a soft murmur escaping her lips. Her hand rested protectively on the swell of her belly, now 7 months along. They had been ecstatic at the ultrasound just last week, watching the tiny, thrumming heartbeat of their son. They'd already named him Leo. Gideon had held her hand, his eyes misty, and sworn he'd never felt a love so profound. It was a flawless performance. The memory should have paralyzed him. Instead, it was gasoline on the fire of his desperation. That life, the one of impending fatherhood, of PTA meetings and suburban obligations, felt like a gilded cage closing in on him. Naomi, with her gentle strength, her unwavering belief in him, her perfect pedigree and social grace, had become the beautiful, unknowing warden. He felt suffocated by the sheer, unblemished goodness of it all. He craved chaos. He craved the thrilling, selfish pulse of a life lived for no one but himself. And that pulse had a name: Kendra Lowell. His phone buzzed silently in his pocket, a single vibration he had programmed just for her. Wheels up in 45. The driver is at the corner of Greenwich and Nen Moor. Kendra. She was everything Naomi was not: ambitious, sharp-edged, and utterly unsentimental. A PR executive from a rival firm, she had met Gideon at a tech gala 6 months ago. Their affair had started with clandestine lunches at forgotten downtown bistros and escalated to stolen weekends in the Hamptons while Naomi visited her parents in Connecticut. With Kendra, he wasn't a future father or a husband. He was just Gideon, a powerful, desired man. She didn't want a family. She wanted the world, and she saw him as the rocket to get her there. He knew it, and he didn't care. Her ambition was a mirror to his own. He pulled the bedroom door shut with an almost imperceptible click. In the hallway, the sterile silence of the apartment seemed to judge him. Every piece of art, every custom-designed piece of furniture was a testament to the life he and Naomi had built. A life he was now throwing away like a losing stock. He slipped on his driving loafers, grabbed the bag, and walked towards the private elevator that opened directly into his apartment. As he pressed the button, his reflection stared back at him from the polished bronze doors, a handsome man in his late 30s, his dark hair perfectly styled. Even at this hour, his jaw set. He looked like a man in complete control, but inside his heart, hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat of fear and exhilaration. The elevator descended a smooth, silent drop from his life in the sky to the waiting escape on the street. He stepped out into the pre-dawn chill of Manhattan. A black Cadillac Escalade was idling exactly where Kendra said it would be. The driver, a discreet professional from a private service he didn't recognize, stepped out and took his bag without a word. Gideon slid into the plush leather interior. The city lights blurred as the car pulled away from the curb. He didn't look back at the monolithic glass tower where his pregnant wife slept, dreaming, he presumed, of the perfect life they shared. He couldn't afford to. He took out his phone and typed a single message to Kendra. "On my way. Burn the ships." Her reply was instantaneous. "The fires are already lit, baby." A slow smile spread across Gideon's face. It was done. He was free. Or so he thought. The Gulfstream GC650 cut through the stratosphere, a silver needle stitching a path from the cold reality of New York to the fantasy of St. Bart's. Inside the world was champagne and soft leather. Kendra Lowell was draped across the seat opposite Gideon, her long, tanned legs propped up on the edge of his. She was wearing a silk jumpsuit that shimmered under the cabin's soft lighting, and her laughter was as bright and bubbly as the Dom Perignon in her flute. "To us," she said, raising her glass. "To new beginnings, and to never having to check into a hotel under the name Mr. Smith again." Gideon clinked his glass against hers. "To St. Bart's." He watched her as she sipped her champagne, her eyes sparkling with triumph. Kendra was beautiful, undeniably so, but her allure was more than just physical. It was her razor-sharp ambition, the way she looked at the world as a series of objectives to be conquered. She had conquered him, and it was a surrender he had welcomed. "Did you—" she began, her voice dropping slightly, the only hint of vulnerability she ever showed. "She was asleep," Gideon said, cutting her off. He didn't want to talk about Naomi. He didn't want to picture her waking up reaching for him and finding only cold sheets. "She won't know anything until morning. By then we'll be having breakfast overlooking the Caribbean." Kendra's smile returned brighter than before. "Good, no loose ends. My boss at Edelman is going to have a conniption when he gets my resignation email. But then again, dating the CEO of Nexus Capital is a bit of a conflict of interest. Wouldn't you say?" "Ex-CEO soon enough," Gideon mused, swirling the scotch in his tumbler. That was part of the plan. He had already set in motion his sabbatical, He would step down, citing personal reasons and burnout, handing the reins to his competent but uninspired COO Robert. He had liquidated a significant portion of his personal stock portfolio over the past few months, funneling the money into untraceable offshore accounts. He had built an empire, and now he was walking away with a king's ransom. The flight passed in a haze of alcohol and intoxicating plans for the future. They talked about buying a villa in Monaco, a yacht to sail the Greek islands, attending the Cannes Film Festival, not as guests, but as power players. It was a fantasy woven from money and ego, and for Gideon, it was the perfect antidote to the quiet domestic life that had begun to feel like a death sentence. They landed at Gustav III Airport, the notoriously short runway, a thrilling welcome to the island. A private concierge met them on the tarmac, whisking them through customs and into a waiting Range Rover. The villa was a modernist masterpiece carved into the cliffs of Gouverneur, with an infinity pool that seemed to spill directly into the turquoise sea. "It's perfect," Kendra breathed. Walking through the open-plan living area and out onto the sprawling terrace. "I had it booked for weeks," Gideon said, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. He inhaled the scent of her perfume, a heady mix of tuberose and ambition. This was real. The weight of his other life was an ocean away. The first 24 hours were idyllic. They swam in the pool, drank rosé on the sun-drenched terrace, and made love with a desperate energy, as if to physically erase any lingering trace of his past. Gideon felt a lightness he hadn't experienced in years. He didn't check his New York phone, which he had powered down and tucked into the bottom of his suitcase. He was off the grid. He was a new man. The first crack in the perfect facade appeared the next afternoon. He was lounging by the pool while Kendra was on a video call with her lawyer, finalizing the details of her wrongful termination suit against her old firm, a golden parachute she'd engineered with Gideon's help. His burner phone, a simple prepaid device for emergencies, buzzed on the table beside him. It was a number he didn't recognize, but the New York area code sent a jolt of anxiety through him. He ignored it. It buzzed again. And again. On the fourth call, he answered, his voice clipped. "Hello. Is this Gideon Roth?" The voice was professional female and unfamiliar. "Who is this?" "My name is Dr. Lena Hansen. I'm Naomi Roth's obstetrician. I'm calling because we had her 30-week scan scheduled for this morning and she missed the appointment. We've been unable to reach her on her cell or the home phone. Given the circumstances, we thought it best to try her emergency contacts." Gideon's blood ran cold. "The circumstances? What circumstances?" "It was a high-risk appointment, Mr. Roth. We noted a slight arrhythmia in the baby's heartbeat last week and wanted to monitor it closely. It's likely nothing, but we never advise missing these scans. Is Naomi with you?" "Is she all right?" The world tilted on its axis. An arrhythmia. Naomi had told him the doctor said everything was perfect. Had she been protecting him from worry? Or had she simply not wanted to burden him? The image of her alone in that vast apartment, possibly worried or unwell, pierced through his bubble of selfish bliss. The baby. Leo, his son. I'm not with her, he stammered. I'm traveling for work. The lie tasted like ash in his mouth. I'll try and reach her right away. He hung up his hand, trembling. He tried Naomi's number from his burner phone. It went straight to voicemail. Her inbox was full. He tried the landline. It rang and rang until the automated operator took over. Panic began to claw at his throat. What if something was wrong? What if she'd woken up? Realized he was gone, and the shock had sent her into premature labor. What if she was hurt alone, unable to call for help? Kendra finished her call and sauntered over, stretching languidly like a cat. Good news. They're settling. Who was that? Wrong number. Gideon lied, his mind racing. The paradise he had built was suddenly a prison. The sun felt too hot, the sea too loud. The beautiful woman beside him looked like a stranger. In that moment, he realized that you can't burn a ship if your entire life is still on board. He had to go back. He had to make sure she was okay. He would tell her some lie, a sudden unavoidable business crisis in Zurich. He was good at lying. He just needed to see her to know that she and the baby were safe. Then he could disappear for good. Change of plans. He said, his voice strained. We have to go back. There's an emergency at the company. Kendra's face fell. Her perfect smile replaced by a mask of petulant disbelief. What Gideon know? You said you were done. We just got here. It's non-negotiable, he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. He was already on the phone with the aviation charter, his voice all command and authority again. I need my jet fueled and ready for departure. Destination Teterboro, immediately. The escape was over. He was flying back into the storm, completely unaware that the storm was not what he thought it was. It was not a medical emergency or a heartbroken wife. It was something far colder, far more calculated, and it was waiting for him patiently in his home office. The sun rose over Manhattan, casting long shadows between the skyscrapers. In the Roths' penthouse, the morning light streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the silent air. The bed, an acre of white Egyptian cotton, was empty on one side. The indentation of Gideon's head was still faintly visible on his pillow. Naomi Roth did not wake with a start. She did not wake with a gasp or a frantic search for the man who was supposed to be beside her. She awoke slowly, calmly at her usual time of 6:30 a.m., as the internal clock of her pregnancy had dictated for months. She lay still for a moment, feeling the gentle flutter of her son kicking beneath her ribs. She smiled a genuine, private smile. Good morning, Leo, she whispered to her belly. Then, with a resolve that was as quiet and profound as the sunrise itself, she sat up. She looked at the empty side of the bed. She noted the missing weekender bag from Gideon's closet, the space on his valet tray where his Patek Philippe watch usually sat. There was no panic, no tears, just a deep, cold sense of confirmation. For a woman who looked the part of a pampered socialite, Naomi possessed a mind like a steel trap. Before she was Mrs. Gideon Roth, she was Naomi Prescott, a rising star in the world of forensic accounting. She had worked for Deloitte, specializing in uncovering complex financial fraud within multinational corporations. She could follow a single dollar through a labyrinth of shell companies, offshore accounts, and fraudulent invoices. She noticed patterns others missed. She was trained to see the truth buried beneath layers of deception. She had resigned after marrying Gideon, eager to embrace a new life. But the skills once honed never truly dulled. And for the past 4 months, she had been conducting the most important investigation of her career, her own husband. It had started with a subtle tell. A second phone she'd found charging in his gym bag, which he'd clumsily explained away as a dedicated international line for a sensitive deal in Singapore. Then came the unusual cash withdrawals from a secondary account, large, sporadic, and always just under the $10,000 federal reporting limit. To anyone else, they were nothing. To Naomi, they were red flags. She didn't confront him. She didn't cry or scream. She observed. She became the ghost in her own marriage, silently gathering data. While Gideon slept, she used her knowledge of his habits. His passwords were all variations of his first dog's name, and the year he founded his company, to access his personal accounts. What she found was a meticulously constructed secret life. She hired a private investigator, a discreet ex-Mossad agent named Ari, who charged a small fortune and was worth every penny. Ari had provided the name Kendra Lowell. He provided photos of them at a secluded hotel in the Berkshires of Kendra, driving a new Porsche Cayenne, a car registered to a Delaware-based LLC that Naomi quickly traced back to a slush fund Gideon had set up years ago. But the real evidence, the kind that truly mattered, she found herself. Digging into Nexus Capital's financials, she discovered a pattern of consulting fees being paid out to that same LLC. Gideon was embezzling from his own company, siphoning millions of dollars to fund his affair and build his escape hatch. He was a brilliant CEO, but a sloppy criminal, blinded by arrogance. He never imagined his gentle art history major wife would be capable of untangling his web. He had catastrophically underestimated her. This morning was not a discovery. It was an execution. She rose from the bed and went not to the phone to call her friends in a panic, but to her home office. She bypassed the sleek Mac on her own desk and went to Gideon's imposing mahogany desk. She turned on his computer. A moment later, she was past his firewalls, her fingers flying across the keyboard. She downloaded the final pieces of evidence from the keylogger she had installed on his machine a month ago, transcripts of his encrypted chats with Kendra, his recent liquidation of personal stocks, the wire transfers to accounts in the Cayman Islands. It was all there. A complete portrait of a man dismantling his life in preparation for a new one. At 7:15 a.m., she missed a call from her obstetrician, Dr. Hansen. She saw the name flash on the screen and silenced it. She had fabricated the arrhythmia story and told the doctor's office last week that she would be unreachable for a few days due to a family matter, asking them to please try her husband's number if they needed anything for scheduling. It was a cruel, necessary breadcrumb, a way to puncture his bubble of paradise and reel him back. At 8:00 a.m., she called her lawyer, Benjamin Carter, a bulldog of a man who specialized in high-asset divorces. "He's gone." "Ben," she said, her voice steady. "He left last night. The plan is in motion. The documents are ready." Naomi Carter's voice crackled over the phone. "Are you sure about this?" "Once we file, there's no going back." "I've been sure for months," she said. She looked around the opulent penthouse at the life Gideon had bought, a life he thought defined her. He thinks he was escaping a cage. He has no idea he just walked into a trap. She spent the rest of the day in a state of hyper-focused calm. She ate a healthy breakfast for the baby. She did her prenatal yoga. She packed a small bag for herself, not with designer clothes, but with essentials. A laptop, several hard drives, and a thick file folder bound with a rubber band. She wasn't a woman scorned. She was a predator whose prey had finally taken the bait. While Gideon was flying back across the Atlantic, fueled by a manufactured panic, Naomi was preparing the battlefield. The confrontation wouldn't be a tearful showdown in their bedroom. It would be a corporate execution in the one place he felt most powerful, his office. And she would be the one holding the axe. The descent into Teterboro Airport was turbulent. The Gulf Stream shuddered as it passed through a thick bank of clouds, and for Gideon the physical jolts were a perfect match for the chaos raging in his mind. The idyllic haze of St. Bart's had evaporated, replaced by the cold, sharp-edged panic of a man whose carefully constructed worlds were about to collide. Kendra sat across from him, sullen and silent. She had barely spoken a word since his abrupt decision to leave. Her arms were crossed, her face a mask of bitter disappointment. The dream had lasted less than a day. "I don't understand why I couldn't just stay at the villa," she said for the 5th time, her voice tight with resentment. "You could have handled this and come back." "It's complicated, Kendra." Gideon snapped his patience worn thin. "My COO is calling a snapboard meeting. Something about a potential hostile takeover bid. It's all hands on deck. I need to be there." This was the lie he had settled on during the frantic flight. It was plausible urgent, and painted him as the indispensable hero swooping in to save his company. It was a much better narrative than "I panicked because my pregnant wife's doctor called." He had even called his COO Robert, and left a vague, authoritative voicemail about rumors and the need to circle the wagons, laying the groundwork for his story. "So this is it?" Then Kendra asked, her voice laced with accusation. "We run away, and the first sign of trouble you run right back." "This isn't running back," he insisted, leaning forward. "This is protecting the assets. Our assets. The money, the resources for our future. It's all tied to Nexus. I have to put this fire out, and then I'm done. I promise." She looked at him, her sharp eyes searching his for any sign of weakness. She was a transactionalist at her core. As long as the ultimate payout was secure, she could tolerate a delay. Finally, she nodded. "Fine. But you're putting me up at the Mandarin Oriental. And this had better be quick, Gid." As soon as the jet's wheels touched the tarmac, Gideon's world split. He became 2 men. One was the suave lover, ushering Kendra into a waiting town car, with a kiss and a promise to call her as soon as he was free. The other was the worried husband, pulling out his New York phone and dialing Naomi's number with shaking hands. Still voicemail. He called the doorman at their building. "Frank, it's Gideon Roth. Have you seen my wife this morning?" "Oh yes, Mr. Roth. Good morning, sir." Mrs. Roth left about an hour ago. A car picked her up. A car. Did you see what kind? A black town car, sir. Looked like a corporate service. Relief washed over Gideon, so potent it almost made him dizzy. She was okay. She was up and about. She must have just gone to her doctor's appointment late. The arrhythmia was probably nothing, just as the doctor said. He had panicked over nothing. The guilt was instantly replaced by a fresh wave of irritation. He had cut his trip short, upset Kendra, and flown for 6 hours, all for a missed appointment. He got into his own waiting car, a sleek Audi A8, and barked directions to his driver. Nexus building, and step on it. During the drive into the city, he rehearsed his story for Naomi. He would be the hero. He'd heard about the takeover bid and had to come back immediately. He would express profound regret for not being able to tell her before he left, framing it as a selfless act to protect her from stress during the pregnancy. He would shower her with affection, promise her a makeup trip to any destination she desired. He would be so convincing, so loving, so utterly in control that she would never suspect a thing. By the time he was done, she would be apologizing to him for causing him to worry. His phone rang. It was Robert, his COO. "Gideon." "Thank God. What is this about a takeover?" "My phone has been ringing off the hook all morning. I've spoken to our largest shareholders, and no one has heard a thing." "Are you sure your source is reliable?" Gideon's brow furrowed. He had expected Robert to have heard the same rumors he had planted. "Just get the board on a conference line for 3 p.m. We need to present a united front," he blustered, trying to maintain control of the narrative. "The board is already here, Gideon. They're waiting for you in the main conference room. They've been here for an hour." "What, why?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. Robert's voice, when it came back, was strained and formal. "They called the meeting Gideon, not me. They said it was urgent. They said it concerns your leadership." The blood drained from Gideon's face. This was not part of the plan. A board meeting called about him. It made no sense. He had delivered record profits for 10 consecutive quarters. He was the golden boy of fintech. He arrived at the towering glass headquarters of Nexus Capital a few minutes later. The lobby felt different, the usual deference of his employees replaced with nervous, averted glances. As he strode towards the executive elevators, his assistant, a young, perpetually terrified man named Peter, intercepted him. "Mr. Roth. They're waiting in the Olympus room. And, sir, your wife is here." Gideon stopped dead. "Naomi. Here." Why, Peter swallowed hard. "She's with them, sir, in the conference room. She asked me to give you this when you arrived." Peter handed him a single sealed manila envelope. Gideon's name was written on the front in Naomi's elegant, familiar script. His heart began to hammer against his ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. This was wrong. All of it was terribly, horribly wrong. He tore open the envelope. Inside was not a letter. It was a single, glossy photograph. It was a picture of the villa in Gouverneur, the one he and Kendra had just left. It was taken from a distance with a telephoto lens, but the image was crystal clear. 2 figures stood on the terrace, champagne glasses in hand, their heads close together in a conspiratorial toast. Gideon and Kendra. The photo was time-stamped. Yesterday. 4:17 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. The carefully constructed walls of his lies crumbled into dust. She knew. While he was basking in the sun, she knew. While he was flying back, panicking about her health, she knew. The doctor's call, the missed appointment. It was all a trap. He looked up from the photo, his eyes wide with a dawning, sickening horror. He was not the predator returning to his den. He was the prey walking blindly into the abattoir. And his quiet, gentle, pregnant wife was the one holding the butcher's knife. The Olympus room was on the 80th floor, a glass-walled sanctuary reserved for the most critical meetings of Nexus Capital. It boasted a panoramic view of New York City, a vista that had always made Gideon feel like a king surveying his domain. Today it felt like he was walking the plank. He pushed open the heavy glass doors and stepped inside. The air was thick with a tense, funereal silence. The entire board of directors was there, 6 men and 2 women who owed their considerable wealth to his vision. They were seated around the massive granite table, their faces grim and unreadable. They did not look at him. Their eyes were all fixed on the person standing at the head of the table in the spot usually reserved for him. It was Naomi. She was wearing a simple but elegant navy blue maternity dress. Her hair was pulled back in a neat chignon, and her expression was one of serene, chilling composure. She looked directly at Gideon, her gaze not fiery with anger, but cold with the detached precision of a surgeon about to make the first incision. Beside her stood her lawyer, Benjamin Carter. his arms crossed, looking like a vulture, ready for a feast. Gideon Naomi said, her voice calm and even, echoing slightly in the silent room. "Thank you for joining us. Please take a seat." She gestured to the single empty chair directly opposite her. It felt less like an invitation and more like a defendant being directed to the stand. He walked to the chair. On legs that felt like lead, the photograph still clutched in his hand. He dropped into the seat, his eyes darting from Naomi to the stone-faced board members. "Naomi, what is this?" He began, trying to inject a tone of bewildered authority into his voice. "What's going on?" Robert said something about a board meeting. "This is not a board meeting, Gideon." Naomi interrupted, her voice cutting through his bluff. "It's an intervention, or perhaps more accurately, a receivership." From a leather portfolio in front of her, she slid a thick, spiral-bound document across the granite table. It stopped directly in front of him. The cover read, "Project Nightingale, an internal audit of the CEO's discretionary accounts." Project Nightingale. He whispered, his mouth suddenly dry. "It's what they call the person who sings." Naomi said, a flicker of something almost pitying in her eyes. "I thought it was appropriate. I suggest you open it." His hands trembled as he opened the report. It was his entire secret life laid bare in spreadsheets, charts, and financial statements. It was all there. The Delaware LLC, Lowell Holdings, the Porsche Cayenne, the wire transfers to the Cayman Islands, the fraudulent consulting fees paid out from Nexus Capital's accounts. It wasn't just evidence of an affair. It was a meticulously documented case of felony embezzlement. Page after page, his crimes were laid out in the cold, irrefutable language of forensic accounting. Naomi had missed nothing. She had tracked every dollar, every secret transaction, every lie. She had even included a projected timeline of his planned sabbatical, cross-referencing it with the liquidation of his stocks and the offshore transfers, presenting it as a clear plan to abscond with company funds. How he breathed, looking up at her, his mind reeling. "How did you? You thought I spent my days planning charity galas and picking out nursery colors, didn't you?" Naomi said, her voice still quiet, yet it filled the entire room. "You forgot who I was before I met you. You saw what you wanted to see, a beautiful, supportive, and slightly naive wife to complete the picture of your perfect life. An asset. You catastrophically misjudged your asset, Gideon." She then turned her attention to the board. For the past 4 months, she announced, her voice gaining strength and authority, "I have been conducting a private investigation into my husband's financial activities, both personal and corporate. What I found was a systematic pattern of fraud and embezzlement totaling over $18 million from Nexus Capital." A collective gasp went through the room. Board member Harold Chen, an old friend of Gideon's father, looked pale. "This report," Naomi continued, gesturing to the copy in front of Gideon, "contains irrefutable proof of every transaction. Bank records, wire confirmations, shell company registrations, and sworn affidavits from the private investigators I employed. Everything you need to remove him for cause is in there." Gideon felt the floor drop out from under him. This wasn't a divorce negotiation. This was a corporate coup. She had him cornered not as a cheating husband, but as a criminal. "Naomi, please," he pleaded, his arrogance shattering, replaced by raw, desperate fear. "We can talk about this, privately. We're long past private conversations." "Gideon," she said, She then delivered the killing blow. I have, however, prepared a solution that avoids this becoming a public spectacle. Because despite your actions, I have no desire to see the father of my child in prison, or to have the value of this company and my son's future inheritance destroyed by a federal investigation. Benjamin Carter stepped forward, placing a second, much thinner folder on the table. This is a post-nuptial and severance agreement. The lawyer stated, his voice booming in the silence. Mr. Roth will resign as CEO and from the board effective immediately. He will plead no contest in our divorce proceedings, citing irreconcilable differences. He will forfeit 75% of his personal assets, including all Nexus stock, to a trust established for his and Naomi's child, Leo Roth. The remaining 25% will be used as restitution to the company to repay the funds he misappropriated. He will cede all rights to the Tribeca penthouse and all other shared properties. In exchange for his full and immediate compliance, the findings of Project Nightingale will be sealed, and this board will agree to frame his departure as a voluntary resignation for personal health reasons. It was a complete and total annihilation. He would be left with nothing. No job, no money, no home. He would be erased. You can't do this, Gideon stammered, looking around at the board members, searching for an ally. He found none. They stared back at him with the cold eyes of investors who had just seen their life's work threatened by the very man they had trusted to protect it. Naomi picked up a pen from the table. She held it out to him. "You have two options, Gideon," she said, her voice devoid of all emotion. "You can sign this document, walk out of this building with what's left of your dignity, and start over. Or you can refuse, and Mr. Carter will walk these findings over to the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York. The choice is yours. You have 5 minutes." The king was checkmated. The master of the universe had been outmaneuvered. He looked at his wife, truly seeing her for the first time. He saw the brilliant, ruthless strategist. She had always been the woman he had been too arrogant and self-absorbed to ever truly know. And in her eyes, he saw the reflection of his own ruin. The 5 minutes Naomi gave him felt like both an eternity and a split second. Gideon's mind raced through 1,000 possibilities, 1,000 arguments and threats. But they all dissolved against the granite wall of her preparation. Every escape route was blocked. Every countermove had been anticipated. He was trapped in a cage of his own making, and she held the only key which she had no intention of using. He looked at the pen she held out to him. It was a simple black fountain pen. He had given it to her on their first anniversary, a symbol of the life they were supposed to write together. Now it was the instrument of his undoing. With a shaking hand he took the pen. The weight of it felt immense. He flipped to the last page of the agreement, his signature line waiting like an open grave. He could hear the frantic beating of his own heart, the only sound in the suffocating silence of the Olympus room. He signed his name, the name that had once been a hallmark of power and success. The ink looked black like poison on the crisp white page. He had just signed away his entire world. Benjamin Carter took the document, reviewed the signature, and gave Naomi a curt nod. It was done. A press release announcing your resignation for health reasons will be distributed in 1 hour. Naomi said, her voice now that of a CEO addressing a dismissed employee. Your corporate accounts and access have already been suspended. A security detail will escort you to your office to collect your personal belongings. You have 15 minutes. After that, they will escort you from the building. She didn't wait for a reply. She turned, and without a single backward glance, walked out of the Olympus room, her lawyer following in her wake. The board members, as if released from a spell, began to murmur amongst themselves, avoiding his gaze. Robert, his COO, and now his successor, gave him a look that was a mixture of pity and contempt. The walk to his office, flanked by 2 stoic security guards, was the longest walk of his life. Employees peered out from their cubicles, whispering. The news was already spreading. The king was being deposed, paraded through his own fallen kingdom. His office, once his sanctuary, felt alien. Naomi had been thorough. His personal laptop was gone. The family photos on his desk were gone. All that remained were the trappings of his job industry awards, deal trophies, a whiteboard covered in now meaningless projections. He numbly packed a few personal effects into a cardboard box, a framed photo of his late father, a couple of books, the pen Naomi had left behind. 15 minutes later, he was standing on the curb outside the Nexus building, holding a small, pathetic box of memories. The city bustled around him, indifferent to his spectacular fall from grace. He had no car, no driver. He was just another man on a New York street. He pulled out his burner phone and dialed Kendra's number. He needed someone, a familiar shore in this shipwreck. She answered on the second ring, her voice impatient. "Gideon. Are you done? I'm bored to death in this hotel room and the room service is mediocre." "It's over, Kendra," he said, his voice hollow. "Great. So what's the plan? Are we going back to St. Bart's tonight?" "No, you don't understand," he said, the words catching in his throat. "Everything is gone. The company, the money, the apartment, all of it. She took it all." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. He could practically hear the gears turning in her mind, recalculating, reassessing her investment. "What do you mean she took it all?" Kendra's voice was sharp, stripped of its seductive warmth. "What about the money in the Caymans?" "Our money. It's part of the settlement." "Restitution," he choked out. "It's gone." Another pause, colder and longer than the first. When she finally spoke, her voice was unrecognizable. It was the voice of a creditor calling in a bad debt. "So let me get this straight," she said, her words dripping with venom. "You blew up your life, you brought me along for the ride, and you're walking away with nothing." "You have nothing. He started, but he had no answer. "You are a fool, Gideon," she hissed. "A weak, pathetic fool. Don't ever call me again." The line went dead. He stood there, phone in hand, as the full weight of his isolation crashed down upon him. He had betrayed his loyal, brilliant wife for a woman who had just discarded him like a bad investment the second his stock plummeted. He had traded a priceless treasure for a worthless piece of glass. He had nowhere to go. He couldn't face his parents. His friends were all business associates who would scatter now that he was powerless. He started walking with no destination in mind, just one of the millions of anonymous faces in the urban sprawl, a ghost haunted by the empire he had built and lost in a single day. The silence from Naomi was more damning than any scream could ever be. She hadn't just divorced him, she had deleted him. 6 months later, the city had shed its autumnal colors for the stark, crystalline beauty of winter. The frantic energy of Manhattan felt a world away from the quiet, tree-lined streets of Brooklyn Heights, where Naomi now lived. The Tribeca penthouse, a monument to a life that no longer existed, had been sold. Its cold, minimalist spaces and ghost-filled memories were traded for the warmth of a 4-story brownstone with original moldings and a small, snow-dusted garden out back. The air here smelled of old wood lemon polish, and faintly of the baby powder and milk that now defined Naomi's world. Her life was no longer measured by galas and board meetings, but by feeding schedules and the miraculous weight of a sleeping child in her arms. Leo Prescott. Roth had arrived in late November, a healthy 7-pound declaration of the future. He was a perfect fusion of his parents, possessing Gideon's dark, thick hair and expressive brows, but with Naomi's calm, unnervingly perceptive grey eyes. Sometimes, when she looked at him, a pang of the past would echo in her heart, a phantom limb of a life she'd been forced to amputate. But then he would grasp her finger with his tiny, perfect hand, and the ghost would recede, replaced by a love so fierce and absolute it felt like the sun. This was her new empire. Not a glass tower scraping the sky, but the 4 walls of a home filled with light and the soft gurgle of a happy baby. Her days were a peaceful rhythm of domesticity, but her mind remained as sharp as ever. She managed the Leo Roth Trust with the same quiet precision she had used to dismantle Gideon's life. She had weekly calls with Robert Nexus Capital's new CEO. Her input subtle but incisive, guiding the company her son would one day inherit. She had transformed from a silent partner into a silent ruler, her power more profound for being unseen. She was not a woman recovering. She was a woman remade, forged in the fires of betrayal, and stronger for the heat. One crisp December afternoon, she decided to take Leo for a walk. The air was frigid, but the sun was bright, glinting off the icy branches of the trees in the park. Leo was nestled in his stroller, swaddled in a cashmere blanket, his rosy cheeks the only part of him visible beneath a tiny woolen hat. The rhythmic crunch of Naomi's boots on the frosted path was a soothing percussion to the quiet of the day. It was a moment of perfect, earned peace. Her phone vibrated in her pocket. She glanced at the screen, expecting it to be her mother, or perhaps Benjamin Carter, with a quarterly update. Instead, the screen showed a blocked, unknown number. Her first instinct was to ignore it, to dismiss it as a telemarketer intruding on her sanctuary. But something, a flicker of intuition, as cold and sharp as the winter air, made her pause. She stopped the stroller by a wrought-iron bench overlooking the East River and answered her voice neutral. "Hello." A moment of static-filled silence, then a voice hesitant and rough, as if it hadn't been used for some time. "Naomi." Her breath caught in her throat. Her hand tightened on the handle of the stroller. The voice was an echo from a buried life stripped of its familiar timbre of command and arrogance, but it was unmistakably his. It was Gideon. She said nothing, her silence a shield. "Naomi." "Are you there?" he asked, a note of desperation creeping in. She finally found her voice, the words emerging colder than she intended. "What do you want, Gideon?" A ragged exhale on the other end of the line. I heard about the baby." He said the words tumbling out, as if he'd rehearsed them 1,000 times. "I saw a picture. A friend of a friend. They sent it to me. He's beautiful now." The old nickname, once a term of endearment, whispered in the dark, now felt like a trespass, a violation of the new life she had so carefully constructed. "He is," she replied, her voice flat. She looked down at Leo, who stirred slightly in his sleep, his little mouth making a soft, sucking motion. She felt a surge of protectiveness, so intense it was almost painful. I'm I'm in a program, Gideon continued, his voice cracking. A 12-step thing. For a lot of things. My therapist calls it pathological narcissism, ego, sex addiction. I'm trying to really understand why I did what I did, why I threw away everything. He paused, and she could hear the hollow sound of the room he must be in. I'm working a job at a hardware store out in Queens, stocking shelves, mixing paint. It's humbling. Naomi imagined it Gideon Roth, the man who wore $10,000 suits and commanded billion-dollar deals wearing a canvas apron, his hands dusty with spackle. The image should have brought a sense of satisfaction of schadenfreude. Instead, she felt a profound and weary sadness. The waste of it all. I know I have no right to ask this, he said, his voice dropping to a raw whisper. I know I gave up everything. I forfeited my rights. I signed the papers. But I was wondering if maybe someday, far in the future, I could see him. Just once. I don't want anything. I won't ask for money or forgiveness. I just want to see my son. The plea hung in the frozen air between them. Her mind, the forensic accountant's mind, saw it as a negotiation, a first move in a long game to re-enter their lives. Her heart, the mother's heart, heard only the broken plea of a father. She looked across the river at the Manhattan skyline, the glass towers like shards of a distant, painful memory. She had won. She had taken everything from him, just as he had planned to do to her. She had the power, the money, the control. And most importantly, she had their son. She could just say no. She could hang up the phone, block his number, and he would have no recourse. It would be a clean, final act of erasure. But then she looked down at Leo's sleeping face. She saw the shape of Gideon's jaw in the soft curve of her son's, the shadow of his brow over eyes that were all her own. One day, this tiny, innocent being would grow up. He would ask questions. He would have a void in his life in the shape of a father, and that void could fill with anger, with resentment, with a confusion that could poison him. Denying Gideon completely might protect her. But would it truly protect her son? Her entire plan had been about securing Leo's future. What kind of future would it be if it was built on a foundation of her own bitterness, however justified? The final act of her victory, she realized, could not be vengeance. It had to be grace. Leo deserves to know his father, she said, finally. Her voice clear and steady, the decision settling within her, solid and sure. But you won't be his father until you become a man he can be proud of. You won't be the man on the cover of Forbes, and you won't be the man who stocks shelves in Queens. You have to become someone new. She could hear him holding his breath on the other end of the line. So keep working your program, she continued, her voice, the sound of steel wrapped in velvet. Stay sober. Find a life that has meaning beyond a balance sheet. Build something real, something that comes from your hands and your heart, not your ego. When you've done that for a long, long time, years, Gideon, you can call me again, and we'll see. It was not a yes. It was not forgiveness. But it was not a no. It was a chance, a sliver of light at the end of a long, dark tunnel of his own creation. It was more than he deserved, and it was a final, quiet testament to the strength of the woman he had so profoundly misunderstood. A choked, ragged sound came through the phone. A sob. "Thank you, Naomi." He whispered the two words, carrying the weight of his entire fallen world. "Thank you." She ended the call without saying goodbye, and slid the phone back into her pocket. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and violet. She adjusted Leo's blanket, shielding him from the wind that swept off the river, and began to walk again. The path ahead was bathed in the golden light of the fading day. She was no longer Naomi Roth, the millionaire's wife, nor was she simply Naomi Prescott, the forensic accountant. She was Naomi, a mother, the architect of a new life, a survivor who had faced the ultimate betrayal and had not only weathered the storm, but had emerged commanding the winds. Her past was settled. Her future and her son's was just beginning. The story of Gideon and Naomi Roth is a chilling reminder that the quietest people in the room are often the most powerful. It's a story about the devastating consequences of arrogance and a testament to the unbreakable strength of a woman who was pushed to the edge and decided to build a new world from the rubble of her old one. Gideon thought he was escaping a gilded cage, only to discover he had been living with a brilliant lioness who knew the value of patience and the art of the perfect trap. His betrayal was loud and reckless. Her response was silent, strategic, and absolute. What would you have done in Naomi's shoes? Could you have maintained such cold, calculated composure in the face of such a deep betrayal? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were captivated by this story of deception and empowerment, please smash that like button. Share this video with someone who loves a good story, and make sure you hit subscribe and ring that notification bell. We have more tales of real-life drama and shocking twists coming your way, and you won't want to miss a single one.